What are these lost books? How many are there?
Well, the question of how many there are is really kind of up in the air. It depends on how far you want to come forward, I guess. What I mean by that is the largest sections of the lost books, if you will, call them that, were written between around 200 BC and 200 AD. That's where the glut of it is. But then you have books that were written as far, as, for example, they say that Jasher, the book of Jasher, one of the renditions, one of the copies of the book of Jasher probably came out around the 1700s. So, is that a lost book? That's somebody telling a story. Well, if that is your criteria, then that's what all of them are. And so you have this problem of where do you draw the line. One could say, and I apologize for going this route. I don't want to offend anybody, but I want to make a point. If you say that the Book of Mormon, for example, written in the 1800s, was a lost book because it was a revelation of God through Joseph Smith, where do you draw the line as to what a lost book is? So that's the first point I want to make, and people don't usually think about it that way, but it is what it is, and when we're dealing now with history, and now you have to ask how far back you want to go. So, having said that, we have about, let's take the Bible, for example. Let's just take the Bible. We in the Baptist Bible Belt here believe that there are 66 books in the Bible, no more, no less. But if you're Catholic, you have the Apocrypha, which means the hidden books. And at one time they were called hidden because they had this arcane knowledge that they didn't want to have the normal person exposed to. Then they became hidden because maybe the knowledge was a little bit less worthy. If you're a Protestant, that's what you think, so you throw the books away. But if you look at Christianity worldwide, Mike, and you get out of a myopic view of thinking that Christianity in the U.S. is all that Christianity is, and you put all the Bible books together of all of the major sects of Christianity, you come up with 93 books. Now, out of those 93 books, 2 of them are very, very special. They are considered to be lost books by other people. By us, we consider the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees to be lost books. And indeed, they were lost to us, but they weren't lost to the Ethiopic church because they've been around from the beginning of that church. The book of Enoch was written about probably 200 BC, and is written in, some people think, 3 sections, and some people think 5 sections, but the oldest one of those books probably was in the library of Alexandria when it burned, because it predates the burning of it. It was a very important book, and it was floating around in that area. As a matter of fact, we know that Jude was reading that book and considered it canon because he quoted it word for an entire paragraph. So lost books are books that possibly were lost to us, but not maybe to other Christians in other parts of the world, as odd as that sounds. The Ethiopic Bible has 81 books in it. And it's kind of odd to think about, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But something that kind of puzzles me is that why were the books in the Bible chosen over the books, or the so-called lost books? Well, why were the ones in the Bible chosen?
Well, there are 2 major answers to that. First, let's break the books down into, let's say, 3 categories. 2 of these categories may overlap, but let's break them down into 3 categories. Okay. One of them, let's call apocryphal books. They're books that actually were in the Bible, and actually you could not find a Bible without the Apocrypha. It was very difficult to find a Bible without the Apocrypha before around 1840. almost every book in the world, every Christian Bible, had the Apocrypha in it before around 1840. And then it became it became cheaper because there were more Protestants that were, coming about and wanting their own Bible, and they wanted to throw away the Apocrypha. So they started printing a Bible without the Apocrypha. So they're the apocryphal books, the hidden books. Then the other category is called the pseudepigrapha, which means the false writings. And these are books that were attributed to other authors, but we know that they didn't write it. For example, one of the infancy Gospels, written around 400 A.D., is attributed to James. Well, unless James's mummy wrote it, it probably isn't James. And so you have these false writings that are in a category. And then you have another category, we'll call it the Gnostic books. Because Christianity we were in a war. We were in a war of belief systems back in the first century. Christianity was not Christianity, pat and simple, even a dozen years after Christ died. People were arguing about who he was and what he was. Yeah. And part of the church belief was a Gnostic belief. They believed that what was spiritual could not touch what was corporeal. In other words, God did not mess around with flesh because it would have soiled him. And so Jesus could not have come in the flesh. It was an apparition of a spirit that was fooling us. So if you go in that train of thought, then you had the problem of the death, burial, and resurrection, because spirits don't die. That was just a trick, and therefore the person hanging on the cross was an illusion, a ghost, a wraith, whatever. They came up with an idea of their cosmology that actually I look at and I go, my God, this actually makes sense. They said, the world is really screwed up, Mike. There's nothing really right with it. Bad people get away with things. Good people have bad things happen. This is an insane world. God couldn't have done this, not the God of everything. So in the Gnostic cosmology, this insane angel named Yaldabaoth created the earth, created the heavens and the earth as we know it, and Yaldabaoth was quite crazy, quite insane. And because a insane deity, let's call him a sub-deity, created this thing, it is in itself insane. And that answers the question as to why everything goes crazy in this world. I could understand why people would believe that cosmology. It actually kind of makes sense. When you stop and think about all the bad things that are happening, there's 20-some-odd Middle Eastern countries right now in turmoil, and you have to ask yourself why a perfect God created this imperfect world. And that was their answer for it.
Yeah.
So, I guess to get back to the question at hand, the lost books are lost to us. They occurred, you asked about canon. I guess after this explanation, canon is, for all practical purposes, a stamp of approval by the powers in charge. What I mean by that is, if the Gnostics had won the battle, our Bible would contain the book of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John, the book of Judas, the Gnostic Gospel of Mary, the Gnostic Gospel of Philip. It would have been an entirely different Bible. But they lost the battle. Politically, they lost the battle. And so those who are in political control of the church, who had their theology, searched out the books, that did not go against their theology, that introduced ideas that were conforming to their theology, and they accepted those books. Also, there were letters being passed around, and those were being read by a lot of Christians. They came into the Bible because they had popular demand. So you had two things going on. You had what was popular at the time of the canon, what was read by the majority of the churches at the time, and the books that did not go against their theology. And even up to the point of Martin Luther, who thought that the book of James was a pissy little book that should be thrown into the river, a book of straw that should be burned up, because he did not like the idea in James that said, you got to work for this thing. You got to show that you've got this salvation, this grace, by actually putting forth something and, prove it, Bubba. And he didn't like that. It went against his theology, and he really wanted that book thrown out of the Bible, and actually went so far as to suggest that happen. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It answers it a lot better than I expected. But back to kind of towards the beginning of Christianity, like with all these books and everything, and of course there were many other books that weren't placed in the Bible, as we just talked about. But a lot of people mention the Council of Nicea, and is it possible that the Council of Nicea edited and modified books that are in the Bible?
Yes, they certainly, well, in a way they did. I guess I could explain it like this. If you have several versions of a book, which we do, we have, there's 600 basic codices that would make up a Bible, not to digress much, but when you say blah, 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 it's in the original text, you can't say that because we don't have the original. What you're saying is it's in the text that we decide to take this Bible out of. The last time that the King James was, the last time that the Textus Receptus was used to translate a Bible was the King James. But there's 600 of these put together scraps and pieces of books that we use to translate to try to get a Bible that has fewer errors. Okay, so even back then they had several versions of several books. And these guys went through all the versions and they said, we believe that this is the best version because this says this and the one that we want says the other thing, which we think matches what we believe. So even if you say they didn't modify by laying their hand on things, you can say that they modified by the exclusion of books that didn't quite fit in with what they were wanting it to say. They selected the versions that came closest to fitting what they wanted. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I have a member in the chat room that I'm sorry, Joseph, I have a member in the chat room that he's a little lost about some of these lost books. Can you name a few, because there's many of them, can you name the most important of the lost books that weren't placed in the Bible?
I don't know if I can name what's most important because I think that's a personal matter, but here we go.
Yeah.
There's the first and second book of Adam and Eve. That answers, I guess, let me put it this way. Most of these lost books try to answer a question that are left lacking from the Bible. So that's called the Midrash. They delve into this storyline and they go, this wasn't even explained. What the heck? I mean, how did Adam and Eve come out of the Garden of Eden and survive? Because they were like babes and they didn't know anything. So first and second book, Adam and Eve, answers that question. First, second, and third book of Enoch, Jasher, Jubilee, the Apocalypse of Abraham, the Apocalypse of Thomas, The War Scrolls, that's a really interesting book. It's a story of a battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. The Gospel of Philip, Mary Magdalene, the Apocrypha of John, the Gospel of Thomas. I love the Gospel of Thomas. It is a fantastic book. The Gospel of Judas. You have other things like the 29th chapter of Acts. It doesn't occur in most Bibles, but it was picked up, I think, in a Syriac version. They have this last chapter of Acts that was added on. So you have pieces of books also. The Infancy Gospel of James, Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the Life of Saint Isa. That is a phenomenal book. Most people think, Christianity is an Eastern religion, and there's a collective sigh when you say that. It's like, gasp. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. It was produced in a Middle Eastern environment, and the Gospel of Saint Isa says that Jesus actually visited India and Tibet and in that area and learned from them and brought back knowledge. As a matter of fact, he had to run from them because he wanted to teach everyone, including the untouchables, and they didn't like that. First, Second, Third, and Fourth Maccabees, Bel and the Dragon, the Wisdom of Sirach, the Wisdom of Solomon, Tobit, Judith, Susanna, Shepherd of Hermes. I don't know. I could go on, but you get the idea.
Yeah, that's a good bit of them. Speaking of Christianity, I just got a message in the chat room. It's a really good question because you're talking about a while ago about Gnosticism. A lot of people will say that, or other researchers out there say that that Christianity was hijacked by other previous religions, such as Gnostic beliefs and faiths. Through your research and studies, have you come across anything that proves or disproves if Christianity was hijacked?
Well, in a way, yes. Let's look at our own belief system right now, and it'll really kind of give us a door inside. We celebrate Easter, okay? It's like Ishtar. It's a fertility rite. We celebrate Christmas at the time of Saturnalia because we were trying to hide from the sun worshippers in their midst, and so we take all of these things onto us. We graft in pagan things. Some of them we do because we simply like it. Some of them we do because we're rubbing elbows with people and we like the way that they do things. Some of them we did because we were hiding in the midst of them, and we took on Christmas because it was easier for us to get away with it in that period of time. What this guy in your chat room is probably referring to, and I'm not sure, is the fact that Plato believed in this convoluted cosmology that I told you about with the Aldebaoth and the Archons. And he believed in this idea of coming to enlightenment, what we would call salvation, through knowledge. And he believed in this transmission of knowledge. Christianity was combined with that and became Gnosticism. But the odd thing is, we almost had a Gnostic pope, a church leader, in the I think it was like 140 or 170. I'd have to go back and look. But this guy came within 2 votes of being the leader of the church, and he was a Gnostic. But there were different levels of Gnosticism. So if I come to you and say, I believe that knowledge saves, not grace, then you could say, well, you have to come to the saving knowledge of God. That's true. And then you would be kind of battling on and quibbling over words. So it's really easy to have your theology kind of swing in one direction or the other. Much like you would aim a gun, you would only be 1 degree off here, but you would miss the target by half a mile, a mile away. So that's the way that goes. And yes, I'll give you another example that happened to me not very many years ago. I was in Trinidad and Tobago teaching, and someone came up to me and he said, "Well, where did your training came from?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Baptist." And he literally took about 2 steps back, because in Haiti, voodoo is a combination of Roman Catholicism and African paganism. And in Trinidad and Tobago, there was a section not of Roman Catholics but of Baptists that melted with the Africans over there, and they produced a Baptist belief system that they call themselves Baptist, but they channel Michael and Gabriel and Jesus, and the spirits began to take possession of them. So, and I spoke to one of these guys, and I said, what's going on here? This sounds kind of weird. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, don't you have a Pentecostal background too?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, don't you speak in tongues?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Don't you say, 'Thus saith the Lord'?" And I said, "Mm-hmm." And he said, "Are you channeling God?" And I said, "Oh, I see." It's a matter of how you look at it, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Believes that it is authentic. It is the Word of God. So an apostle believes that this book is the Word of God, and it's not in our Bible. And that is a disconnect to me. And then I'm thinking to myself, I want to know what he believed was true enough to write it so that I'm reading it now, 2,000 years later. So that's the thing, you see. It's important for 2 reasons. It's important to know what the source is, but it's more important to me to know what they believed. What did the apostles believe was real at the time and influencing their belief system, which in turn became part of our belief system? And that's heavy stuff. That's getting to the source. That's like understanding Judaism so that you can better understand where Christianity came from. Well, this is written about 200 BC. And this is understanding the source material that the scriptures were written around. The other thing is that there aren't a lot of books in the Bible that have a lot of information about angels. And yet angels are so much a part of our theology. They're so much a part of our Christianity. They exist in Islam. They exist in Judaism. They exist in Christianity. And yet there's not a lot of material. As it turns out, the book of Enoch actually informed our belief system as far as angels go, because they informed the belief system of the apostles, and the influence continued to be passed down in oral traditions and in just basic ways that family view things and pass things on to their children and to their friends and people around. And so when you get right down to it, the first section of the book of Enoch ties in to the section of Genesis that informs our belief in the Watchers and the angels and the Nephilim and the giants and all of those things.